up from that. And last class, we talked a great deal about, again, creating those happy little squares, getting nice layout of the UV shells, and getting those all back into the 0 to 1, and having the checkers all the same size. So those kind of things we talked about. And we also got into a discussion about, excuse me, we got into a lot of discussion about the seams on our textures and how we can try to improve those. In fact, one of you guys even asked me about, well, how do I get that stuff to flow neatly one into the other so we don't have seams? And that's actually what we're going to talk about today, improving the quality of our UV layout. So we're going to get into some stuff that should really help in that regard. So now, if you kind of take a look here, I've got a sample object here, which we're going to be working with. And if you look at it, you can kind of see that there's some issues going on here in terms of the things we've already talked about of what's not ideal in terms of UV layout. What do you guys see that tells you that this UV layout could be improved? The size of the squares are not even. The squares are not consistent. Absolutely. No, you guys nailed it. I can see already that there's a problem here because if I look, I see they're not even squares, they're rectangles. So I see that there's some distortion here. And these squares here are significantly larger than these squares here. And if you look even closer at some of these images, you can see they're not fluidly transitioning from one into the other. So obviously what I'm looking at here is a series of seams. So there's a seam right here. I can tell that this is a shell, this is a shell, and this is a shell, because when I look at them, not only do they not fluidly transition from one to the other, which would indicate that they were connected to each other, but I've got squares of different sizes, which is telling me that the resolution of this shell is not the correct proportion to the resolution of that shell. So I can see, yeah, there's definitely some issues in here. And Cassandra says, if you have many pieces to put in the 0 to 1, will there ever be a point where a piece would come out a solid color? And absolutely, if you had 50 billion shells to get inside of the 0 to 1 space, and you had to shrink your shells down so much to get them all to fit, could they ever come out as a solid color? Yeah, that's a possibility. And you can actually, in the attributes of the checker material, you can make an adjustment to increase the number and the size of the squares if necessary. However, the very important thing to realize is when you are working in Maya and you are working with your UV editor on your UV shells, you've got all this space out here, this workspace, which is infinitely large. And what we're going to do is we're going to work on everything out here to check the size and the quality and the shape of our squares. And then when we're all done, they go back down into this 0 to 1 space. So it really doesn't matter. You wouldn't technically have to fix that, because as long as it looks good when you're working on it out here in terms of size and shape and quality of the squares, then you're good. If you make it smaller, it's just going to be a smaller version of the same thing. Does that make sense? Yep. So that's why we have this huge space, because you might be wondering, holy Macalandy, what do we need all this real estate for? So that's what it is. This is kind of like our desk space. This is our work area. This is where we make things as big as we need to do our job. And then when we're all done with our masterpiece, we frame it here in the 0 to 1. This is like where we put it inside of a frame and hang it on our wall. So that's where it goes when we're all finished. All right, good questions though. All right, so let's take a quick look over here. Again, the idea that there's definitely some seams here, and that's less than ideal. So here we go. We pop on over here, and oh, Brian, I just wanted to make sure we are recording so far, right?
Yep, we're recording. It's going good.
Excellent. Oh, I just wanted to make sure because I didn't see the recording button and I didn't press that. I had to sign in a different way. It's really weird. I feel like every time I sign on to go to training, it's different.
Oh,
So,
that's weird. Yeah, I didn't see it signed on when I came on either. So,
I signed on and it was asking me for my password, and then it said, no, that's not your password, and I had to reset it.
oh gosh.
And I had a couple of windows open at the same time, and they're all telling me different things. And I was like, man. So, okay, well, as long as we're recording, we're good.
I think we're good.
Yay. All right, so let's talk about refining UV shell layout then, because that's way more fun than go to training stuff. So UV shell, again, what we're gonna do is fix these shells. We're gonna sew things together. We're gonna make it so that these transitions are neater and cleaner. And what's funny is we're gonna be using a lot of terms that sound like what you would hear a tailor say, because creating and fixing UV shells and sewing them together it's very similar to the process of being a tailor. Because if you think about it, human beings are 3D objects, and clothing or cloth is a 2D object. And we sort of cut cloth to fit the shape of a 3D object as neatly as we can. And that's kind of like what UV shells are. A UV shell is kind of like the cloth that you would cut in order to make a suit or a pair of pants or something like that. So a lot of the terminology you hear will sound a lot like something a tailor would say, because that's what we're doing. We're basically making a suit for our objects, something that fits very neatly over that 3D form, however complex it happens to be. So let's go take a look at a super fun activity where we can play with some tools. Specifically, we're going to be looking at Move and Sew and the Cut UVs tool to try to improve the layout quality of our objects. So, of course, this is an activity, so I'm going to set my project to my activity file folder. And then I'm going to open up my new scene, and it's my advanced UV tools activity right up there at the top. I open that guy up. And we see, oh yes, the famous marker from the slide before. And when you look at the shells here, again, you can see some of them are bigger than others, and they're definitely not connecting to each other smoothly. So what that tells me is, again, resolution is off, and the shells are not connected. And sometimes you can connect them and sometimes you can't, but that's what we're going to discover. Can we connect them, yes or no? So in order to start working on this, first thing we're going to do is open up our UV editor. And you will see in our UV editor, we've got a whole bunch of shells in here, not necessarily all in the 0 to 1. So I'm actually going to grab these guys and just move them a little bit out here into our workspace. It's a bit easier to see. And when I'm looking at my shells here, or at my geometry, I can see, yeah, there's definitely not a connection here. This is obviously the wrong size, and they're not fluidly connecting to each other. So what I'm going to do here is just to figure out which one of these shells go to which one, I can literally select an edge on this object here. Just select one edge, and you'll see that in the UV editor, this is that edge. And you know, when you select an edge in the UV editor, and you can select it in here, you can select it out there, it doesn't make any difference. But you can see this edge is supposed to connect to that one, because this edge here is represented by this one and this one. So this is sort of brother and sister edges of the same object. So if you take a look at these two shells, you can see, wow, if these are supposed to connect to each other and this edge is represented by both of these, this one is definitely way smaller than that one. So I can see already where some of my problems are. These things are not going to connect well. And obviously this is way smaller than that. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab this UV shell and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. And the only gauge I'm using is I'm looking at how long these edges are and how long these edges are. I'm just going to scale them until they look closer to the right size. And if I look at this, oh, that's a little too big. And you notice I scale from the middle. I'm not using these because that's going to distort my shell, right? That's going to change the overall proportion. So I scale from the middle. And now these edges are looking more like those edges in size, okay? So let's go back over here and select this edge. And then, yeah, that looks much better. because this edge looks much more like the size of this edge, and it looks like I could sew these together and they would fit pretty well. Now, what's that going to show me out here? If I press 6, hey, look at that. My squares are much closer to the same size. So again, I can look at it here and rationalize and reason and figure out, oh, okay, this needs to be bigger or this needs to be smaller, and these will fit together because these edges are the same size. But the checkers do all that work for me. I don't even have to look at this. I look over here and I see happy squares and squares that are of similar size, then I know that these are the much closer to the correct proportion relative to each other. So it's a kind of a handy little way. Again, I can think about it using this information, but the checkers is a shortcut. You don't even have to think about it as much. All right. Now, I do see that this is looking like rectangles when I'd like to see squares. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this entire UV shell. And actually, I don't want to get that one underneath because there's somebody under there. So you guys might remember this trick. Grab one UV, hold Command key and the right mouse button and choose to UV shell. And then that guarantees that you grab just the one shell. So I'm going to move this piece over here, and I'm going to do the same thing with this guy and move that over there. And again, things are looking more or less the right size. But again, I'm looking at this and I'm seeing rectangles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to grab just this shell on the bottom. And here's where I am going to scale, not from the middle, but right here. And watch, if I scale in X, ooh, look at that. They look more like squares. And I could have scaled in Y, also looking more like squares. So you can see that this proportion, this shell is starting to be more accurate in terms of depicting this surface, because the more happy the squares are, the better job is going on there. So, and I can do the same thing here. Grab this shell up here, and again, just kind of mess with it a little bit. And the closer to happy squares I get, look at that. These things look like they would actually fit together pretty well. So now it's time to try to attach them to each other. Because again, if you look at this, you can see these squares are not neatly flowing into those squares. The pattern is sort of erratic. So what I'm going to do is sew them together. So the way I do that is I go to Edge Mode, and I'm going to click on the edges. And again, when you select an edge, the brother and sister edge will light up. And I could hold Shift and select them one at a time, but I might be here until, you know, the economy gets better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this first one, hold Shift, go all the way to this last guy and double click, and it will select everything in between. So now I've got this whole edge and this whole edge. Now I'm going to use my cut and sew tools, right? And again, inside my UV editor, there's tools in here for me to play with. So I go to cut and sew, and I see there's something called move and sew. So when I do that, look at that. Nice fluid transition. The squares very happily go from one to the other because the seam has been removed. Does that make sense? There we go. Let's see if we got a, there we go. Yar matey, excellent. I like your verbiage. Hell yeah, excellent. All right, so move and sew is our buddy. And we're going to do that again and again so we get the hang of that. So let's keep going. Let's do another one. Here's one up here. It's not as bad. You know, I got pretty happy squares here. I got some rectangles there. But let's see what we're talking about. So I'm going to go to Edge Mode, select one edge. Okay, this edge will attach to that one. So I'm going to grab this shell. I'm going to move it over there. I'm going to line it up. And again, I can see if this is going to attach to there. These edges are way smaller. So obviously there needs to be some adjustment here. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger there. And I'm looking at rectangles here, so I'm going to try Y first and see if that kind of squares them out. And that does a pretty good job right there. So that's looking better. All right. So this shell's looking pretty good. I'm starting to go the right direction with this. Grab an edge, and again, to select just those edges, because if you double click, it's just going to go all the way around both, and you'll be selecting other shells and like all kinds of crazy stuff. So what I want to do is I just want this edge right here. So what I'm going to do is select one edge, hold shift, go to the other end, and double click. Whoop, it did the whole thing again. And it just connects or just selects everything in between those two edges. And then I go to move and sew. And I sew it together. And again, now I've got this more fluid transition. Now, here's what I want you guys to see. You notice that I was very careful to line up my shells. I was very careful to set them up, try to get their size right, try to get my squares looking pretty good before I attach them. Now, you don't necessarily have to do that. Look what happens. I could take this shell, make it this small, right? I could take that shell and put it way the heck over here, and I could still attach it to this shell. If I go to edge mode, select this edge, double click on that one to go all the way across. I don't even have to look. I know it selected the edges over there because they're the same edge. And then I can use my move and sew, and it will sew it together. But look at how bad that turned out. I might sew those edges together and go, oh wow, no, those can't be sewn together, because look at how terrible that looks. But you and I both know, because I just did it a second ago, that when I'm a little bit more careful about how I do it, and I sew those edges together, when I do my move and sew, oh yeah, that's actually a pretty good connection. So I should keep that. And the reason I point that out is because, again, the objective is to have a beautiful looking UV layout. The objective is not eliminate all the seams. No one will ever say, wow, your texture looks like garbage, but is it all, did you get rid of all the seams? Because that's not the goal. The goal is great looking texture, great looking UV shell layout. So you got to keep that in mind. So again, as beginners, what I recommend you guys do is line those shells up, take your time and get them set up and attach them to each other. All right. Any questions on that? Okay, great. Just wanted to make sure. Again, it's fairly straightforward, but like I said, as a beginner, you kind of have to be a little bit more gentle with stuff because sometimes you're not sure 100% what you're looking at. Okay, so let's take this this situation. Let's say we are doing a commercial for this particular marker. We're doing an ad to get people to buy this marker because it's so great. Markero, the greatest marker ever, right? Now, if we're doing a print ad of a marker, when we create this model and we texture it and all that fun stuff, it's going to be a still image. So when I'm looking at it, you're like, hey, yeah, that looks great. That looks perfect. I can put my, company logo on there, and I can put all kinds of fun little details and whatever, slogans I want to put on there, something witty about markers. So this is going to work just fine for a print ad where it's going to be stationary. Now, the reason this is going to work for the print ad is because, well, the squares look pretty good. They fluidly connect to each other. It looks pretty nice. Now watch what happens though when I look at this side of the marker. Oh, right here. You guys see that? That is a texture seam. But here's the thing. If my ad is a print ad and I'm only going to see the marker from this side, that's not a big deal. It doesn't matter. I'm never going to see that horrible, ugly, no good seam. So the fact that I'm looking at my marker from over here, perfect. And the reason I know that is because I'm looking at the storyboards for this work, the mock-up for it, and it's showing me that I'm not ever going to see the other side. So I'm good. Doesn't matter that there's a seam over there. However, if I'm doing a TV commercial for the marker, right? And in my commercial, this is my shot, right? We zoom in on Markero, the greatest marker ever. I've not used anything like it ever. Da Vinci would be jealous. Oh no, look at that texture seam. That looks terrible. So obviously this is going to be a problem because that was my camera movement. And now I see this side of my marker. And that's not good, right? So this is not going to work. And I would know that again from my storyboards that tell me the camera is going to come around here and see this side, and then I'm going to see this terrible texture seam. So what I have to do is move this texture seam. I don't want it right here because my camera will see it. What do you guys think? Where should I move the seam to so that it will be less conspicuous? Right, the bottom. Excellent, Cassandra. Excellent, Seth. That's exactly what I'm talking about. I need to move that seam where no one's going to see it. Because the reality is there's going to be seams. No matter what you do, there's going to be a seam. When you take something curved and lay it out flat, there's going to be a seam. But where the seam is makes all the difference in the world. So don't want it here, don't want it there, but under here is just fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the edge so I can see where it needs to be. So I don't want the seam to be here where it is currently. I want it to be here. So here's where I'm going to use my cut UV edges tool. So I'm going to select these edges, right? And that represents right there, right? And I'm going to move this seam from right here where it is now to right here, because that's going to work for me better for what I need to do. So again, I go to my cut and sew menu set, and here's where I use cut. And that literally cuts this piece off. And you can see I've got a new seam there, but I still have the seam over here. So here's where I have to do that move and sew thing. Now, if I select this edge, you know, I have to sew it to something. If I select this edge, I see, oh, it goes over here. Okay. Well, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my UV shell, right? Just grab one of the UVs, hold the command key and the right mouse button to UV shell. And then now I can take this thing and move it over here, right? And then guess where? Yeah, that's right. These edges here, guess what I'm going to do? Move and sew. Boom, sew those guys together. And they're looking better. Now, it's a little bit wiggly in here. I see a little bit of distortion. Well, you know what? Some of that I can fix on my own. I'm going to grab all my UVs on this row, just this row, and using my scale tool, I'm going to square them up. I'm going to grab this row of UVs, square them up, and I'm just scaling in the y-axis only. Grab these guys, square them up. Grab these guys, square them up, flatten them out. And you can see this is improving. It's still not great, but way better than it was a minute ago. All right. So now my UV layout is improving. Not bad. I got a little bit more work to do, but I have connected these things to each other neatly and smoothly. And my seam is on the bottom so that when my camera comes around for my TV commercial, Markero, the greatest marker ever. Dun, dun, dun. It still looks great. So those things are going well. So far, so good. But I need to do some more work in here. And if you look at my UV shell, you can see it's very neat and clean in through here. And then it kind of starts looking wiggly. And that's what's giving me all of this out here. So you can kind of see where the problems are. Where the shell is very neat and clean, that's what I'm seeing in terms of my squares. So this needs to be worked a little bit more, a little bit harder. Well, what can I do? Well, we've got some other cool tools for you to work with. Boop. We've got some UV mapping tools that work kind of like an iron. They literally iron out the wrinkles. So thank goodness for that. Now, the tools we're looking at, we're going to talk about the Smooth UVs tool. And basically what it's doing is it's trying to improve our UV shell layout. And it kind of works like an iron. It just sort of removes the extra little wrinkles in what's going on here. And what I really like about the tool is you can actually adjust it and watch what it's doing with one of those interactive dialog boxes and see how it's improving the quality of the layout. So let's take a look at how that works. In terms of the tools and where they are, this one is under, well, let's unfold. We want the Smooth UVs, which is under, I think it's under, I believe it's under modify. They changed the layout of this a little bit on me, and I keep not finding that one sometimes. But I will find it, I promise. I don't give up, I keep looking. That's the key, you gotta keep poking around. Smooth, I found my unfold, and I don't see my smooth.
It's under the tools.
Oh, it is under the tools?
Yep.
Oh, right, there it is. Oh, you know what, I was looking for it in green, but it's not, it's over here.
It's an
Thank you,
old tool.
thank you, Brian. But yeah, so here's my smooth tool. And again, the objective here is to kind of iron out all the wrinkles so that it's not giving you any trouble in terms of my layout. So the way we're going to use this tool is, of course, we go to UV mode, and I'm going to grab all the UVs in my shell. And what Maya is going to do, and it is one of the few magical tools that Maya has. It's one of those tools that when you use it, it actually dramatically does the work for you, and it actually does a pretty good job, which is a rarity. You kind of turn Maya loose. But what we're going to do is Maya is basically going to take a look at the shell you've created. It's going to take a look at the object in question, and it's going to apply a mathematical formula or algorithm to the layout, and it's going to try to make this look as much like that as it can. So it's actually trying to help you out. So once you select all the UVs in your UV shell, then we're going to go to tools, and we're going to go to the smooth tool. And like I said, it creates this little button here. It has both an unfold and a relax capacity. And honestly, I know some people who like the relax capacity of the tool. I'm not a huge fan of it. I'm really a much bigger fan of the unfold, but they both work in the same way, in that when you put your cursor over the word and you drag with the left mouse button held down, the tool slowly mathematically alters your layout, and hopefully for the better. And you can see that looks pretty bad. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the unfold, which again is the one I much prefer. Hold down the left mouse button and drag. And what you will see is as you drag, it's like your UVs go through a metamorphosis. And you can stop anywhere on the path as it sort of unfolds and mathematically adjusts. And then when it's all done, you get to the far end of the range and you look at it, you're like, wow, look at that. I've got great looking squares. They have a little bit of an angle to them. I got some curvature here, so I'm seeing that with the angle of my squares, but I am definitely seeing very uniform squares. These are all the right size relative to each other, and they very neatly flow, and they look pretty good. So, but again, the cool thing about this unfold tool is you don't have to go all the way to the end in terms of its function. You could go part way and then decide to stop. Ooh, that looks good right there. And you could just grab part of it and do an unfold just there. Just grab this down here and do an unfold. And it's kind of like spot ironing. You can kind of tinker with it until you get something that looks good. And then of course, once you've got that looking pretty good, then feel free, hey, let me just come back in here and just kind of tighten this up a little bit myself and see what I can get. I might be able to use that tool and use my brain and use my tools in the toolbox and improve the quality of that layout in a variety of ways. Let me see what I got going on here. This is looking pretty good. There we go. So again, nice looking UV layout, which is always our goal. So that's looking pretty good there. So you might wonder, well, which is better really? Looking like this or that curved version? And here's what I would say in terms of why would you want to do one over the other. Again, knowing what you need this project to do is so important in terms of your decision-making process. So let's say, for example, that on the side of this marker, it's, that's where we write, Markero, the coolest marker ever. And it's going to go right across here, Markero, the coolest marker ever. which means it's going to go right across here. Marker O, the coolest marker ever. So if I'm trying to write that out, right, on the side of my marker, marker O, coolest marker ever, all right? Text comes out in a very linear fashion, and it doesn't matter what you use to generate it. Text is typically very linear. So that would be very easy to put across here because this is very straight, this is very level. But what happens if I've got all my UVs selected and I use my Smooth UVs tool and I take it to this configuration of my UV shell, which looks beautiful, but now that surface is curved. I'm going to have a real hard time getting this linearly created text into this curved position. And it's true, there are applications that will allow you to warp text to make it curve and what have you, you know, Photoshop or whatever you're using. But what you realize is when you take text and you warp it like that, it actually changes the font. It distorts the letters a little bit, and you will get some warpage, and you will see that because when you look at it here, you'll see in order to make it bend, there's going to be some distortion, and then the text won't, it'll look a little bit weird when you put it on here. So again, looking at my storyboards, if I see marker O, the coolest marker ever, and that reads right across here, then it will actually be harder for me to put that text on there like this. But if I have my UVs laid out like this, oh, that's going to be much easier. No sleeping. It'd be much easier to get that text right across here. Does that make sense? Yes, Cassandra, you would have to distort your text somewhat because if your UV shells are sort of wavy and your text is not, then it won't show up. It won't show up straight. It will be wavy. So you want to try to keep that stuff consistent. And again, it depends on the specific situation. And that's why I say, you know, you got to look at your storyboards. You got to look at what the end game is for whatever it is you're making. And then you have to ask yourself, what do I need this thing to do? And that answers a boatload of your own questions and gives you the ability to ask really good questions because now you're thinking, oh, okay, well, if this and this, well, then this is also important. Does that make sense? Yes, if your UVs are sort of wavy looking and you want your text to be wavy, I can't imagine that. But if you did want it to look distorted and weird, that would do it for you. But to be honest with you, if your goal was wavy text, you would do that to the text itself. You wouldn't use your UVs to create the waviness. Does that make sense? Like, let's say that this is not a marker, but like sunscreen. And you know, sunscreen goes with the beach and water, so you want your text to look like water. And you're going to do that with the actual application that creates the text. You're not going to warp your UVs to accomplish that. You know, again, that's like I want my cart to go faster. So what I'm going to do is attach sneakers to the wheels rather than get a stronger horse. So, you know, you gotta kind of figure out the best and easiest solution always. Yep, no worries. And I love your questions. You guys should keep those things going because I think you learn a lot more when you ask questions. I think when you just sort of let the information flow over you, I don't think you get as much out of it. But yeah, try to challenge your brains and come up with some good stuff to ask me about. It only helps you and everyone else too, because you know, there's some people who might be sitting there and thinking, hey, wow, I didn't even think of that. I am so glad Cassandra asked that because I would not have even thought that was a good thing to ask. But now that's a great idea. And in fact, I have another question based on that, you know, because she sparked something in my mind, and now I'm thinking of something else. So yeah, questions are awesome. All righty. So how are we doing? We're good on this? Does that make sense? What I did, why I did it, how it's going down? Squares. We love them. Good. Excellent. Let's get back to talking about some more fun stuff. Oh, sorry. We just did that. The activity using our Smooth UVs tool. All right. So once we got our squares looking good, we got happy squares. And again, when you're looking at the object, every square on the object is the same size, and they all look as good as you can get them. Now your UV layout is good, and you're ready to move forward with texturing. Because again, at this point, we're just trying to get good UV layout. That's our job. And again, I want you guys to remember that on the same object, the square should be the same size. On a different object, all the squares might be different sizes compared to the squares on this object, but that's fine. We are only worried about how big the squares are on any one given object. So just make sure that's very important. All right, so once we got this looking pretty good, we're happy squares, then what we do is we take all of those UV shells and we bring them back into the 0 to 1 space. Remember we talked about we frame these things up. So now they're all back in here. They're looking good. They're all attached to each other. Yay, yay. You know, whenever and wherever we can. If we attach them and they look bad, we don't attach them. So, you know, only the things that make sense logically to connect, we connect to each other. And then once we've got that layout, we literally can take a picture of this. And it's actually called a UV snapshot. And what we do is we take a picture of the UV layout, and that tells us where we can paint. So I can paint on this part, I can paint on this part, because literally any paint that is not on a shell, you're not going to see. So I can paint over here, and that's not going to show up. I can paint over here, I can paint over here. It's not going to make any difference whatsoever. But if I paint, and this is the only time I'll ever tell you this, you have to stay inside the lines. You didn't think that was going to pay off ever. Well, welcome to UVs. You got to stay inside the lines if you want the texture to show up. So when you do line them up, again, you paint in here, and then that's going to show up on your model. So the orange will come through over here to the sleeve. The nice texture pattern of dancing monkeys will show up on your shirt. Your pants, you'll have nice khakis on there. Good to go. You know, yellow where you need yellow. And that is all based on sort of the blueprint that you create with your UV shell layout. And then you just paint right on it. Right? See, there's his hand, and it's yellow. So that made that yellow. All right. You guys ready to do some assigning of textures to our geometry? I will take the utter silence to be a very loud cheer that I can't hear because you're hundreds of thousands of, if not tens of miles away. Okay, we're gonna attach some textures. Because you might be wondering, you know, this is a lot of work. I don't like this UV layout thing and the squares thing. It seems really monotonous. What is the point? Well, the point is we want to put textures on our geometry. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up our file that we worked on Wednesday, and we're going to apply textures so that you can see how that works. So hopefully you saved your file, and I'm going to open up mine, and I saved mine UV mapping activity done. All right, you guys remember this when we made our little squares, right? Okay. Now, we have some pre-made textures for you guys to put on there. Again, typically the process is not you create the texture first and then you fit the shell to it. It's actually the other way around. You lay out your UVs, you put them into the 0 to 1 space, you take a UV snapshot of those UVs, and then you paint inside it, and then you apply it back to the geometry. But unfortunately, we don't really have enough time in our class to paint the textures, which makes me sad. But let me put that in there. It makes me sad that we can't do textures in here because we just don't have enough time. But so what we decided to do is we made some textures for you in advance, and you can connect those and just see how it works, at least, so you can appreciate what textures can do for you. Now, if you guys recall, when we are modeling in Maya and we're bringing image planes into Maya so that we can model, and we're using that image to kind of trace, we put the images in the source images folder, which is going to be a big ticket item, because remember, when we go into our week 3 turn-in, we don't line up the images for you. You've got to create your own project, and you've got to use the source images that we gave you, and you got to put them into the source images folder, and then set your project to that folder, and then you have to bring the images in order to start the modeling process. So remember, that stuff we learned day 1 and day, I want to say 5 is when we get into the image planes and how to bring them in. So you're going to have to use both of those things in order to begin your week 3 turn-in. So start working on that stuff now in terms of lining them up. But just like we put images in the source images folder in order to model, we put our textures in the source images folder also. So if I go to my activity file folder, right, I'm going to go to my 3DF folder, my activity file folder. You'll see in my source images folder, that's where we put the pictures of things, right? Well, for whatever it is we want to model. So what we did was we actually put textures in there as well. So if you've set your project to your activity file folder, which you should have, then we can bring textures in here as well. Now, in order to bring the textures in, we're going to have to go through a series of steps, and so you can again, you want to make sure you write down these steps so you don't miss anything, because if you're missing one of these steps, it gets really frustrating. So in order to apply a texture to geometry, step 1, we create a new material. So I know you guys remember how to do that. Window, rendering editors, Hypershade, because anytime we're talking about materials, we're talking about the Hypershade. So we go to the Hypershade. So the first thing we're going to do is create a new material. So we make another Lambert, because that's what we make in this class. And of course, I get out of the Hypershade as soon as I can and turn on the attribute editor. So I bring out my attribute editor. And again, that's the icon that looks sort of like 3 screwdrivers on top of each other. And this is going to be the material that I'm going to apply to the plane, or the texture and the material I'm going to apply to that plane. So I'm going to call this plane material. Okay. And again, in terms of what it looked like when we applied the checker, right? We went to the color channel and we went to the checker box at the end to plug in the texture. Well, we're going to do that again. There's a reason why we did that way before, because it just gives us practice. So if I want to attach a picture, which is my texture, to my geometry, I'm going to do it the exact same way. So I go to step 2 of the process. I go to the color channel, and I go all the way to the end of the checker box, and I click on it, and it opens up the Create Render Node window. Remember, this is where we went to get the checker. Well, the node that we want now is this one, number 4 on the list, File. And what this is a 2D texture. So what this is going to do is take a 2D texture and apply it to the color channel. And the 2D texture means picture, basically. So we click on the File node, and it opens up, and the sample is jet black because it doesn't know what picture to use yet. Well, we have to tell it. So if I go to File Attributes, you'll see there's a little yellow folder here on where it says image name. And again, it's blank because it doesn't know what image to put in there. So when I see this yellow folder, I click on it, And that's how I navigate Maya to where the picture is. Now, because I set my project, and I know you guys are tired of hearing it, but why I set my project, one of the many reasons, is now when I say, okay, I want to bring a picture in there, I want to bring a texture in there, Maya immediately goes to the source images folder of my activity file because I set my project, so that's where it's looking for it. So then I can go to my plane texture, which is this adorable monkey. I can select it and hit, oh, you are so pushy, Hypershade. And I hit open. And then now I have this picture is attached to this material inside the Hypershade. So now all I have to do is assign this material to that object. And again, we know how to do that. So step 3, middle mouse button, drag and drop, and assign the texture. Now, something very important to realize about this process. I mean, isn't that cute though? Look at that. Oh, looks like it's not lining up quite perfectly down here. I've got a little bit more up there than I do down here. But if you look at that, you would think that this is actually a picture in a picture frame. And look at all that nice modeling. Somebody modeled out the frame, but it's not. It's just a single plane of geometry. But that's the amazing thing about textures is it makes things look more complex than they are. And it's almost like being a magician. It's an illusion to a certain degree that we can make it look more detailed than it really is. So that's why we do textures. But again, this looks like it's not lining up perfectly. I can do a little bit of tweaking. So I'm going to go back to my UV editor and make some adjustments. So if I come in here, you can see why I framed up my UVs like I did to fit them tightly in here. And I'll show you because I'll take this UV shell and I'll bring it outside of the 0 to 1. And what you'll notice is, oh my goodness, what is going on out here? Well, whatever texture is in your 0 to 1 repeats endlessly out here. So wherever you put it, it's just going to show up again and again and again. So what we want to do is make sure we get this into the 0 to 1. And even after we get it in there and we've got our texture in place, we still have a little bit of ability to tweak. So I want to try to bring these two guys down a little bit. And I don't adjust it a lot, just a little bit, because if you do too much, it will obviously distort things. So, but I'm going to try to get more of that picture frame in there, like that. Tuck that in. And that's looking a lot better there. I've got my whole picture frame in there, looking pretty good. Looks like it's a little bit off in rotation as well. There we go. So again, very important to realize that even after you've created your texture, you've still got a little bit of room to tweak, but you got to be careful because if you move things too much, you start to really mess things up and damage them. So you don't want to do that. You want to try to maintain the integrity of the shell, and you tried really hard to make it look good. So, you know, you want to kind of keep that as much as you can. All right. So this one is looking pretty good. Now let's go to our next one. Here's our next UV shell. I've got these 6 faces. So, you know, I'm going to have to line them up with my texture. So I'm going to actually take them back out of the 0 to 1 just so that I can line those up a little bit more easily when I put the texture on there. So again, here we go with the texturing process, or at least the way we're doing it in this class. The texture has been created in advance, but the steps are identical. So step 1, we create a new material, window, rendering editors, Hypershade. In the Hypershade, I create a new Lambert. I'm going to call this my cube material. All right. And again, step 2, I go to the color channel. I go all the way to the end of the checker box. I click on it. It opens up the Create Render node. Within the Create Render node, I go to node number 4, the File node, and click on that. Now I'm in the File node. It's asking me, well, what picture do you want to put in there? So under File Attributes, I go to where the name is. And again, it's blank because it doesn't know what to put in there. I click on the yellow folder, and then I'm going to choose the cube texture, which is this monkey one, and I hit open. So now, oh yeah, that's what the geometry is going to look like now. All right, and again, I'm going to go back to my Hypershade. There you are. Did you see that? So rarely does it pop up when I want it, but that time it did. So again, I want to, for my step 3, apply the material to the object. Middle mouse button, drag and drop. And then I see, okay, the texture's on there, sort of. And again, the issue here is because my shells are not in the 0 to 1, so they're not lining up well. So what I want to do is, you'll see there's 6 sides to a cube. There's 6 pictures in here, so each of these cubes goes over one of these pictures. So let's start with the front one. So I go to face mode and I select the front of my cube. Right? Oh, whoop. That's the front of my cube. All right, so there's the front of my cube. That correlates to this face. So if I look at my textures, that's the front of my monkey in a cage. That's front view. So I'm going to take this image and drag it over there and drop it on. All right. And again, that model looks a lot more complex than it is because of that really cool texture. Monkey in a cage. All right. So now let's look at the top of the cage. All right, here's the top of the cage. So I'm going to select that face. This is the top of the cage. If I look at these things, these two are sort of nondescript. This one's light and that one's dark. This is probably the top of the cage. That's probably the bottom. So I'm going to take this piece and put it right over here. Drop it on there. Looks good. Terrific. Terrific. And basically whatever I put my shell over, that's what I see on the model. So I'm going to come over here, select this face. Should be a side view of my monkey. Take that, line it up onto this image. Again, this is a side view here. I'm going to line him up. Looking good. Again, you can start to see the benefit of a texture and what that can do for you. All right, let's do the bottom. Grab that face. That corresponds to this one. Again, we agree that that's probably the bottom, so I'm going to put that on there. Line that up. Very good. Let's do the back. Here's the back view of the monkey. So I'm going to drag this shell over to the back view of the cage. Again, line it up as best I'm able. You can see, all right, looking good. Monkey in a cage. Oop, oop, one side. One side's not ready. Grab this side. Is my last shell. I drag it over and I put it on top of my monkey. All right. Now, does that look okay? But no, what do you mean no? What's wrong with it? Absolutely, no, you were right, Eric. There's something wrong there, right? This monkey is in Regnad, right? Regnad, the worst thing ever. Now, you and I both know that what that texture should read is danger, but it doesn't. It's reading Regnad, so something's wrong. What do you think is the problem? Any thoughts? Going on. Going twice. Yes, you have to flip it. It's upside down. Absolutely. Something wrong with that shell. Now, The cool thing is it's actually super easy to fix. But the big thing is, well, how would I know unless there was text if my thing was upside down? Like this one could be upside down and I would never know because there's nothing in there to really indicate that. So here's what we have to do. We have to tell Maya to tell us if any of our shells are upside down. And the way we do that is we go to image and we choose shade UVs, or actually it depends on which version of the UV editor you have. It's either under view and you choose shaded, or if you have the older version of Maya's UV editor, it's under image and you'll see shade UVs in there. So it's in one of those two. And it depends on which version of Maya you have. Well, you all have 2018, but which version of the UV editor you have, because even within the same year of Maya, they switched the editor just to make my job even more fluid. But what it does is it colors it for you. Red means facing the wrong way. Blue, facing the right way. So flipping it is super easy. All you have to do is select the face. It's the wrong color. Go to modify, flip. Just flip it over. Now it's blue. So you can go to face, select the face that's red, modify, flip it. Now it's blue. Now watch what happens to our monkey and regnab. Select the face, modify, flip it. Oh, now he's in danger. Yay. So you can see, oh, okay. Now everything's blue, everything's facing the right way, and everything looks good in terms of my texture. Okay, so when we are creating great UV layout, our objective is happy squares. On the same object, same size squares. Make sure we get everything inside of the 0 to 1, and make sure everything is blue in terms of the color of our shell. So, big surprise, that's what we're grading for when we're grading your UVs. So what you want to make sure of is that you've got the shells, again, happy squares, same size squares, everything is in the 0 to 1, minimize seams wherever you can attach them, please do. And then again, make sure they're all blue, because those are the things that we want to make sure you guys can do in terms of your UV shells. Now, this is what we call a stacked UV layout. I'm sorry, a collage UV layout, because they are kind of separate and they sort of form a collage of images. And for this class, that's what we want. Every shell gets its own space. They're all separated. They've all got their own little area within the 0 to 1. However, in some instances, you do put shells on top of each other. For example, let's say I really like this texture here, and I would like this texture to be on the entire object, like it's supposed to be a crate or something. I could literally select these faces and put them all on top of this one picture. And again, this is what we call stacked UVs. Stack them up there on top of each other. And now every side of this box has the same thing on it, the same texture, because each of these shells, whatever they're on top of, that's what they show on the object. So again, excuse me, the idea here is these are stacked UVs. They're stacked on top of each other like pancakes. However, for this class, we don't do that. We do collage layout. And I'll let them all go back to where they were, so that each shell gets its own space, and we can have different things on each face when we set things up that way. And that's what our goal is. We want to be able to put different things on each face. So we don't pile them on top of each other. We keep them separate like this, which we call collage UV layout. All right. Does that make sense in terms of those concepts and what we're doing there? Good, good. I'm glad you guys get that. All right, let's do one more. Yar, me too, Thomas. All right, so let's do one more because, repetition is king. We're going to line it up for the cylinder here, and we're going to apply a texture to it. So again, just like anything else, we want to Oh, hold on 1 second here. Look at that. I got some history on there. I got some history on my object. Ooh, naughty me. I got to get rid of that. Edit. Delete by type. History. Because UV mapping generates history, so be sure to look for that. All right, so here's my object. It's time to apply a texture. So again, the steps are the same. Windows, rendering editors, Hypershade. I'm going to create a new material, Lambert, of course. I'm going to open up my attribute editor, and then I'm going to name that material. Cylinder material. And again, my cylinder, I'm going to go to the color channel, go all the way to the checkbox at the end, click the checkbox. When the Create Render Node window opens up, I'm going to go to node number 4, File. Click on that. It has no idea what to put in there, so I'm going to go to the image name, click on the yellow folder, and I'm going to navigate to my cylinder and apply that image to the material. And then all I have to do is again go to the Hypershade and apply that material to the object. Now it's made of this stuff. And yeah, that doesn't look right. This is supposed to be a can of food. This is not going to work. So let's go to that UV editor and see what's wrong with our shells. Oh yeah, they're all over the place. First off, this one's upside down. So I'm going to grab that entire shell and flip it. So now everything's blue. Now I'd really like this to be the top of my can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab these UVs here on this piece, and I'm going to have to move this guy because it's kind of in the way. And grab this guy and put that on top. Because again, whatever the shell is over, that's what I'm going to see back out in my perspective viewport. So this is lined up nicely. So if that's the top, then this is obviously going to have to be the bottom. There's the texture that represents the bottom. So I'm going to grab this guy and stick him on there. And again, just try to line it up as neatly as you can. And you'll see, oh yeah, that looks pretty good. All right, there's the bottom. There's the top. Now we need the middle. So here's the label for the middle, and here's the shell. So what I'm going to do is take the shell. And obviously, I'm going to have to reorient it. So what I'm going to do is turn it this way. And then I'm going to move it on top of my texture. And then when I look at it, I'm like, wait a minute. This should be the top of the can, but here's the lid. Oh, I'm going to have to flip it over. It's not right. So I'm going to just roll it the other way, 180 degrees. There we go. And I'm going to squish it down just a little bit. Or no, stretch it out just a little bit. I want some more of that rim in there. I like that part. And let's line that up really nicely. Yay, that's looking pretty good. All right, so now I got the top. There's the middle. And I wanted to show you guys. Ooh. What happened here? What is that? Can you guys tell me? What's going on there? That stuff's not lining up. ¿Qué pasó? It's uneven, that's correct. So what is that an indication of? What do you guys think that's showing me? This is just like, yes, a seam, Brian. Good for you. You get a cookie. It's a seam. It's a texture seam. Just like when we were looking at the squares and the squares were different sizes. or we were looking at the squares and they look distorted, you know, those are all indication of seams. I know, I love cookies too. I'm thinking about it because I was at Publix yesterday, and the Milano cookies are on sale. It's buy one, get one. So I got the chocolate mint ones and the raspberry chocolate ones. So it's been cookie-tastic at my house. Anyway, I'm thinking about cookies already. I did eat my breakfast though. So here we go, back to our can. How do we fix this? Yes, we are gonna adjust it. We're gonna fix it. Cassandra is on the ball today. All right, so look, here's the seam. If I go to edge mode and I select it, I can see, yep, that confirms for me the edge of the shell here and the edge of the shell here. Those are the same edge, and that's what I'm seeing here. But I have a different issue. If I just move the edges, which is kind of what we did before, that doesn't really solve my problem. You see how it's just moving the whole edge, both sides. So instead, what I'm going to do is a little bit of tweaking, which is what we were doing before. But what I'm going to do is go to UV mode, grab a single UV. I'm down here right now, and I'm just going to move it a little bit. Wiggle it just a little bit. Grab this guy and move it just a little bit. And you can see it's kind of moving this stuff. Grab this guy and move it just a little bit. All right. Does that make sense? I'm just kind of tweaking my shell a little bit, even though I've already created the texture. And you see it, that's starting to look better. I need to work it a little bit more there and get in here, and there we go. That's looking better. That's looking better. All right, now I've done that side. Now I got to go over here and do it too. Grab this guy. And I can work them both until they line up better. And I'm going to come over here and do the same thing because I got a very similar problem on this side. So what I'm going to do is come over here, grab this UV, move it a little bit, move his body. Right, so bring that down there, and then of course I got to go to the other end and fix that one as well. And I'm just kind of eyeballing it, you know, to try to make it look better. Does that make sense? So I don't have to necessarily cut and sew it this time, but I do need to make some adjustments to it. Because the problem is I can't just sew these together, because if I take this edge right here and this edge right here, right? If I've got those two selected and I do my move and sew, you'll see it doesn't do anything because it can't attach those. They have to be separate. Does that make sense? Because there's no way for this to be represented flat and be able to connect those two edges to each other, because we would be looking at a tube, kind of like a paper towel tube or a toilet paper tube, that cardboard in the middle. That's not flat, that's round. So what we need to do is put a little cut in one side so that we can lay it out flat. Does that make sense? Excellent. Good, good. I'm glad. Cassandra, does that make sense for you? There we go. Is there a better way to hide the seam in there's a different texture? Oh, it does make sense. Okay, good. I'm glad it makes sense. In terms of hiding the seam, again, I mentioned this last time in class, there are tools in Maya that will help you try to fix texture seams. And basically, after you put the texture on the model, you can use this tool, and it works kind of like the clone stamp tool in Photoshop, if you're familiar with it. What it does is it takes samples from both sides and it tries to paint over it, and it generates a brand new texture that seamlessly transitions from one part to another. But the problem is that tool does not always work. Sometimes it works great and you're just like, oh yeah, but sometimes it doesn't. And that's why, oh, and no worries, it's fine. Repetition is a cornerstone. You know, if you don't remember it, then we need to talk about it again. So if that tool does not fix it for you, you still want to do your best. And that's why I always tell you guys, hide your seams as best as you can, tweak, adjust, do everything you can to make it look great without that special tool, because you can't count on it, because you don't use that tool until the very end. So after I've done all this work, after everything is all set, I've already made my texture. It took me hours to make it. Now I've got it all lined up. Now I'm going to paint on there. And then I realize, shoot, the tool's not doing it. Then I have to redo my texture. So the whole point is you want to do everything you can before you try to use that tool, because you have to expect that it's not going to work. You can't count on it. So we always do the best we can to try to make it look good without using that tool. And then if we do need that tool, you know, hey, awesome. Maybe that'll be the difference for us. Does that make sense? Terrific. All right. So we got our UV shells looking pretty good. We got our textures on there. We're just happy as clams right now. Everything's just going great. Woo, unicorns, monkeys, everything. All right. So let's get into the next thing we're going to talk about, which you guys are going to be very excited about, and that is the creation of a texture or a type of texture called an AO or dirt pass. And in terms of the texture, this is a very simple texture, but it looks pretty cool. So we're going to take a look at how that works, how to create one. And of course, just like all elements of texture, it is very highly dependent on the quality of your UV layout. Poor UV layout yields poor texture creation. So we got to make sure we do good UVs. So let's take a look at how we can create an AO pass, which is a very simple texture for our geometry. And the AO pass, just so that you understand, it creates this like shadow information that shows up on your model, and it really accentuates the details because the darker areas are even darker and the lighter areas are even lighter. So as a result, it really pops out details for modeling, and it makes your models look great. So this is a good thing to do. All right, so let's take a look. What the heck is the AO pass? Well, if you make a fist right now and take a look at your fist, you'll notice that there's some like dark creases and crevices in your hand. And this area of your hand, the light just can't get into. You've got some sort of self-shadowing going on in there. I can't really see, you know, there's no light getting in there, and that's why I have sort of shadow. So what we want to do is set it up so that those shadows, because they are a part of real light and the way real light behaves, we want to make sure that our models are getting that kind of thing too. So what we're going to do is create a texture where basically what we're going to do is we're going to take our jar and we're going to apply a new material to it, and it works kind of like photographic paper. You know, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the photographic process for black and white photography, the old school stuff, where they had a piece of paper that would react to light, and then they would put it in like a chemical solution, and then an image would appear. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to apply a material to the objects you've built, and it is like a light sensitive material. And what happens is when light strikes your object, Maya and this material, they kind of take a look at, well, where are the shadows on this object? You know, where does the light hit and where does it create shadows? And then what it does is it creates kind of a permanent shadow, and it creates a picture of your object laid out flat using your UVs, and it remembers where the shadows go. And it's kind of cool because it creates a picture from your object, and then you can use that as a texture. So it's really neat. So we're going to take a look at this process using our jar to create our UV shell. So, or I'm sorry, to create our AO pass. So what you're going to want to do, excuse me. Wow, lots of bullfrogs today. I haven't had any. I usually have hot tea, and I didn't have any today. So again, we're going to file, set our project, and the jar is a skill check file. So I'm going to set my project to there, and I'm going to open up my jar that's been UV'd already. And if you guys remember, I showed you this thing after class on Wednesday, and you can see in my UV editor, my shells are all facing the right way. They're all, they're blue. They're inside of the 0 to 1, and you can see I've got happy squares all over the whole thing. So this is why my AO pass will turn out well. And of course, your shells have to be in the 0 to 1, or it won't be able to remember where the shadow information goes. So these are the steps to create an AO pass. And you know that means you got to start writing, because there's some steps that you need to know. So step 1, we have to activate the rendering engine that will do this special task for us. And it's called Arnold is the rendering engine. So if you go to Windows, Rendering Editors, Render Settings, open that up, and you'll see that there's some different rendering engines to choose from. And that's basically calculators that figure out the behavior of light and how it interacts with the surface. And by default, Arnold is not turned on. So we have to actually turn it on because it's not on right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Windows, Settings and Preferences, Plugin Manager. And a plugin manager is the window where all the third-party plugins are housed. They all live there. So we open it up. Boop. And in the plugin manager, we're going to scroll down to Chinatown. And you'll see that there's a bundle called MTOA bundle, Maya to Arnold bundle. And if you downloaded Maya using the link we gave you, this is in there. There's no way it's not in there. So as long as you're using what we gave you, you're going to be fine. So if you don't see this in here, go to the link that we gave you, download Maya, get that copy going, and then you'll have this. And what you want to do is go to Loaded. Just check that off and give it a second. It takes a second for that to sort of do its thing. So you click Loaded, and then you go to Refresh. And that sort of includes that now with the things that you can choose from. So you'll notice that now Arnold is on the list. So we can choose Arnold. But again, you got to go to the plugin manager and turn it on if you don't see it there by default. So I'm going to choose Arnold. And when I set it to Arnold, it gets all excited. It's going to do some stuff here. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, actually, once you set it for Arnold, you're good there. We're going to close the render settings because it's pretty much automated in terms of what we're going to ask it to do. So the next thing I need to do is apply this special material. And that material is an Arnold material. So if you've not launched Arnold, it's not going to be an option for you. So make sure you do launch Arnold first. And then I'm going to go to back to my rendering editor, back to the Hypershade, because as I promised, we are going to apply a new material, a special light sensitive material to this object. So I go to the rendering editor's Hypershade, open that up. Hypershade opens up. And if you go to the bottom now, it says Arnold down here, and there's a bunch of different things, a whole bunch of new materials to render. And the one we want is the AI ambient occlusion material. And you can kind of see it. It's a sphere with like a little shading on there, and you can see, oh, this is that special light sensitive material. So I'm going to create that, and it shows up in your Hypershade as sort of a white circle on a black background. I don't know, I guess that means light or something, I don't know. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that material and we're going to apply it to our jar. Boop, just like that. All right, so now my jar is made of this special material that receives light, and it will create a texture and remember where the shadows go. And that's all this material is for, is to create that texture. Once we've created it, we'll make a new material to assign that texture. But this is just the creation process. All right, now, once we've got that material on there, the key things that we have to remember, and this is definitely important, is how many pieces is my object made of? If my object is made of one piece of material, which in this case, it's a jar, it's one piece, then all I have to do is select the material, and then we will go into the process of creating the AO pass, the AO texture. If my object is made of several pieces, maybe it's got a lid or whatever, I have to actually select all of the pieces and combine them first before I create this special texture. The reason being, Maya will create a texture, a special texture for each piece of the object. So if your object is made of 100 pieces, it's going to make 100 textures, one for each piece. So it's not the end of the world, but that's kind of obnoxious when it comes to try to assign everything back again. So it's easier if you combine it so that Maya thinks of it as a single entity, and then you can, it will create just the one texture. So, and that's the easier way to go. All right, so now that my jar has been added to this special material, now I'm going to go over to the section where it says Arnold. And again, when you launch Arnold, Arnold will be a menu item, so you can go get it. Under Arnold, with the object selected, that's important. Under Arnold, I'm going to go to Utilities, and you'll see Render Selection to Texture. And that's literally what it's going to do. It's going to take a look at what I have selected, and it's going to create a texture or an image of that object. And again, it's based on the UVs. So I click on that, and in terms of, well, where's it gonna go? By default, I believe it's gonna go to my images folder of where I set my project. So again, keys to why do I set my project? Everything goes better when you do that. So just let that go to where it's gonna go. If you need it to go somewhere else, you can tell it by clicking on this. But for right now, I want it to go to my images folder. And yeah, it's going to my skill check. So in fact, you know what? I'm just going to set it to that. I'm going to set it to my source images folder because that's where I want it to send that picture. And you can see here's the path. It's going to go to source images. And the reason I chose source images is because it's going to create an image, which I'm going to apply through the color channel of the material to my object. So it's going to make me a file. So it's going to go in my source images folder anyway, so I'm just going to send it there. The resolution of the file can be adjusted. We can leave it at 512, that's fine. This is a quality control component. The bigger the number, the more smooth the quality of the image. These kind of work together to a certain degree. The Gaussian filter just makes it a little bit softer, so it's not quite so coarse and grainy. And again, we can leave all of these guys at their defaults. And then I choose render. And it takes about a second or so, and it creates this image. All right. And I'm going to go to my skill checks folder, to my source images folder, and I want to show you the picture that it created, which is right here. Now, if you look at the picture it created, you can see it like sort of burned the light information onto my object, right? I see some shading right here, and I see some shading right here. What do you think that this is right here that it's showing? In terms of my jar. The folds, that's right, these little creases right here that make that sort of rib component there. This area is very dark, and it slowly gets lighter. What do you think, which part of my jar is this? The inside, yes, and this is the outside. Absolutely, and this is, what part is this, do you think, all dark? The bottom, absolutely. The inside specifically. And then this is, what do you think? Yeah, this is the outside. Absolutely. Absolutely. So again, if you look, here's my UV layout. Here's the image it created. If I did a bad job with my UV layout, you would see it here. I would have problems as soon as I assign this texture to my geometry. Does that make sense? It's looking at this to get the information it needs to create that. And that's why we have to be so careful with what we do in here. All right, so now my special material has done its job. It enabled me to create that image. So now I need to create a new material and apply that image. So what I'm going to do is go back to my regular old Maya materials, and I'm going to create a Lambert, right? And this is going to be my AO material, my ambient occlusion material. And again, step 2, to applying that AO pass, I got to go to the color channel, go to the end, click on the little checkbox. And again, the reason we do this stuff again and again is to help you remember, because the steps are similar. You just got to remember them. Go to the checkbox, create render node opens up, go to the file node. It doesn't know what it looks like because I didn't tell it yet. So I go to the yellow folder. And because I set my project to my skill check file folder, and I already put that image in my source images folder because that's where I told it to create it, sure enough, here it is. So I select it and hit open. All right. Now, this material has been applied. I'm going to drag and drop and put it on there. Whoop. Okay. Now, a couple of things. Sometimes when you apply that material, you will see a connection in the transparency channel as well. And it will look just like the connection in the color channel, sort of a black box with a black arrow in it. If there is a weird transparency connection, and you'll know it because when you look at the object, it looks somewhat transparent, which is really weird. You know, the object will look like a ghost a little bit in certain areas. If that happens, all you have to do is hover your cursor over the word transparency. I have to do it over color because there's nothing plugged into transparency. But if you go to the thing where the connection is in transparency, hold down the right mouse button, you will see the option of break connection. If you break the connection of the transparency, that weird transparency thing will go away. So if that happens, don't worry about it. But right now it did it right. Everything is connected in the color channel only. And that's why I can see this really cool shading in here built right in. And if I go inside my jar, there's shading in there. That looks pretty neat. It makes things look kind of dirty. Oh, but what's that? What is that thing? A seam. Very good. You guys are kicking it now. Terrific. It's a texture seam, right? And that's because if I go to my UV editor, right, and I look at my jar, here's the seam, right? It's going right down the outside. I'll select it so you can see it. This edge right here is the same edge as this one here, and I can't connect them to each other because I can't lay this thing out flat and have it still connected. You know, it would look like if you took a paper towel roll, the cardboard in the middle, and just stepped on it and made it flat. That's not laid out flat. I can't see all of it. Part of it is covered. So unfortunately, I can't connect this to this, but as we've seen before, we can tweak it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my UVs on the outside, because if you look really closely, do you see how these UVs are kind of drifting a little bit into this gray area here? I'm getting a little bit of a gray shading coming through here. And if I look at my object, I'm kind of seeing a little bit of gray shading right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab these UVs and I'm gonna move them in a little bit and get them over the whiter stuff, get them away from the darker stuff. Because you can see what happens when I move them, right? When I move it towards the darker, it gets darker, thicker, more prominent. So what I want to do is take everybody and tuck them in a little bit. So I am going to grab all of my UVs on this edge, right? Until I have everybody. Oh, I don't want to miss anybody. All right, I got everybody. And I'm just going to move them in a tiny bit into the lighter area. All right. Now it's getting better, but obviously it's not done because I only did one side. So I got to go to the other side and do the same thing. I'm going to come over here, grab all of these guys. Grab that guy at the top. Come down here, grab that guy at the bottom. And again, same thing. I want to kind of tuck them in a little bit away from this jaggedy edge here. Into the light. Come into the light. There's peace and serenity in the light. So I'm going to get them out of that jaggy part. And then, yay! Texture seam is gone. Now there's another one down here, right along that edge. And that's a function of right here. Again, just kind of touching into this jaggy yuckiness. So I'm going to have to grab that guy and just take the whole thing and make it just a tiny bit smaller. Yay! So that's looking better. And it looks like I'm going to have to shorten the whole thing up just a smidge at the bottom. And that's this down here. And again, if you're ever not sure where do I need to make the adjustment, you just select, it's right down here. I'm just going to grab these guys all along the bottom and just move them up a tiny bit. And you'll see, yay, there goes that little pinch there. Oh yeah, no, that's fine. And again, Cassandra, you don't ever have to apologize for asking a question. And you can see, yes, mine is sewn together, right? Here's the band right here. Here's the lip right there. And you see, here's the interior right there. Now yours, if you didn't sew it together, you would have a seam right there, and it may not be as fluidly attached, right? You might have like a little space in there. You could see where that seam is. But now that you know how to move and sew shells together, you can fix that before you do it. And that's why we try to eliminate as many seams as we can in advance. Because like I said, once you get to the texture phase, it's a lot harder to fix stuff up and make it look good. Does that make sense? Hooray! Hooray for UVs. Isn't that AOPass cool? Isn't that neat? That's kind of cool. I'm a big fan of that process. It looks really good on your models. It really kind of brings out the details, makes them pop. You know, and as a modeler, that's what you're trying to do. You want your details to pop. You want people to see and appreciate all that hard work you put in there. All right. So that brings us to our skill check. Woohoo! Skill check, skill check. I feel like we should have like a special light that comes down, a disco ball or something, and some music when we get to the skill check. But here we are at the skill check. And what we're going to do here is we have a pepper mill for you. And we've built it already. And we've already done the UVs, because I know you're looking at that and going, oh man, I got to lay that thing out. No, you don't have to lay this thing out. We've done it for you. And what I want you to do is just create an AOPass for it. So you got the easy part. We did all the hard part. So this thing has been modeled for you. It's been UV'd for you. So all you have to do is that last little bit that we did together, and that is the creation of the AO pass. But do remember that this thing is made of several pieces, so you want to combine those before you render to texture. So make sure you combine it first so that it creates one single texture map and not one for every piece. Which, again, not the end of the world if it does, but then you're going to have to assign a material to each piece and then hook up the texture to each piece. And it's just more work. So I'm trying to save you from work if I can. All right. So let's create that AO pass for your Peppermill, and that will get you going. And Thomas, if you don't have the plugin, just go look. And if you don't have it, download the copy of Maya that we asked you to, and you will have it. It will be in there. Yep, you got to go in the plugins. Window, settings and preferences, plugin manager. You got to make sure. But like I said, if you downloaded Maya from our link, you're going to be fine. You do have it. Nothing to worry about. And yes, you are using a student version. Absolutely. When I open mine, it says student version too, because I'm a teacher. I'm using it for educational purposes. This application costs about $7,000 if you buy it new, and they're letting us have it for free. So, yeah, the caveat is they get to write on there that it is a student version. It's not any different from the professional one. It's just letting people know you didn't pay for this. Yep, all good. That is correct, Thomas. MTOA bundle. That's the one. All right, my friends. Well, that's it for today. Let's get those week 3 turn-ins done. And like I said, you got a lot of work to do. Week 3 is much harder. The objects are more challenging, and you've got to, so that means it's going to take more time, and you've got to set up the projects. You've got to line up the image planes, which means more work on your end. So start working on that now if you have not done so already. And lab starts at the usual time. If you were in my local class, there's no difference whatsoever. And in terms of your week 3, you are going to UV, but that's just so that we can see that you know how to UV. You have to UV some objects, and we're going to give you some feedback on that, because when we get to week 4, you are going to have to UV stuff, and that will be a grade. So you don't want to, you want to have a chance to make a mistake on your practice run so that you can get feedback and do better on your final turn-in. So make sure you do that UVing for the practice, and that's part of the week 3 turn-in. And all we're doing is a checker pattern. Yep. No, you don't have to do an AO if you don't want to, other than the skill check. For the skill check, you must do an AO. However, for the UV mapping thing that you're going to do for your week 3 turn-in, there you don't have to do an AO pass. But I got to be honest with you, the AO pass is the easiest part. The UVs are the struggle. And the reason we want you to do that is because for your week 4 turn-in, one of the things you're going to do is render out 4 objects that you modeled this month. And it looks better if you put an AO pass on it. So if you UV map that stuff, you can create an AO pass for it, and your stuff will look even more cool. And yes, week 4 you can, or week 3, you can model your own Lego character. Yeah, one of the level 3 assets is a Lego guy, so you can do that. Absolutely. And that is one of the more fun ones to do. So I recommend that one. There's fewer models, but they are harder, and you have to UV. So be ready for that. All right, guys. Well, thank you very much. You did a great job today. I love the questions. Keep that stuff going. That's how you learn and grow. And honestly, it makes it more fun when we have to figure stuff out. Brian, do you have anything to add? Oh, Brian, you say the nicest things. You can't see me, but I'm blushing.
Yeah. Yeah, awesome lecture, man. And
No,
yeah, like you said, you guys need to practice this stuff. That's the only way you're going to, absorb it. It is a leap from your modeling, but it's part of a modeler's job. So learn how to UV.
absolutely. You are going to be UV mapping everything you model in polygons from here on out. So get used to it and learn it now while you have the opportunity, because it's going to be expected in classes that follow this. So get it now. When doing an object like the scissors, would you cut circles for the finger holes or build the shape to form them? Are you talking about modeling or UV mapping? Modeling, okay. Well, there's different ways you could go about making those handles. Based on what you guys know how to do, it would probably be easiest to start with a cylinder and then create the shapes from that. Let me just show you really quickly some thoughts on how to do that, just so you have something to think about. Something you may want to do. Again, start with a cylinder and squash it down, and that's going to give you a lot of the handle shape you need. You can even shape it a little bit to get it a little bit more handily. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to the inputs of how this thing was created, and I'm going to change my subdivision caps to 0, and that removes the edges on the top or the bottom. But you could have just as easily just gone to edge mode and just selected those edges and hit delete. That's also fine. And with that being like that, what you can do is select this face and do an extrusion, edit mesh, extrude, right? And again, hold down that control key and scale from the Z axis, and that gives you an opening, right? And then you can take that opening and do another one, edit mesh, extrude, and just go down. And now you're starting to get a handle shape. Now you might be thinking, okay, well then, now what do I do? Because I don't have one on this side. Well, you could either do the same thing on both sides at the same time, which is totally fine. You could do that. Or what you could do is take this piece of geometry and cut it in half. I'm going to go to my mesh tools, insert edge loop. And, oh, I got it set for multiples. Hang on one second. Okay. All right. Now I got it on one. And create that edge loop right in the middle. And then I don't really need these guys on the bottom. Get rid of those guys. And that edge, I'm just going to move up so it lines up with that edge. All right. And then with this thing selected, I've got half of my handle. So here's where I can use my mirror tools and mirror it. And then it's connected. Does that make sense? And I can make modifications to it as necessary to make it look more like my scissor handle. Does that make sense? How do you delete the center? Yeah, I just hit delete. Yeah, any face you select and just hit delete, it disappears. If I grab a face and just hit delete, it's gone. But does that make sense in terms of what I did there? And again, very handy about using the bevel tool to kind of round things up and smooth them off. Because remember, we're looking for that for this turn in. So you want to make sure you're doing stuff like that. You're very welcome. Anytime. All righty, my friends. Time for me to go. I hope you had a lot of fun and learned a lot. I will see you on Monday, and we will get back at it again, and we'll learn some more cool stuff. So get busy, get modeling, and we will see you on Monday, regular time and place. Take it easy, guys. Have a great one. Thank you again, Brian. You did awesome. I really like the way you fielded the questions back there.
All right. Thank you, Steve. Have a wonderful weekend.
You too. Take it easy.